What's going on, guys? If you're checking out the video, I'm assuming you're either a new WRX owner about to buy a WRX, or you're an existing WRX owner that is just curious what the video is about. Basically, I'm going to go over all like the technical knowledge of when you start modding your WRX, what to look out for, what parts you should be buying, and how to stay budget friendly. So without going too crazy into this, I'm going to give you some part recommendations. I'm going to give you some recommendations on things you shouldn't be putting on your car, that sort of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So if you're new to Subarus and you've never had one before, it may be different from whatever cars you were into before. A lot of Subaru owners refer to modifications in stages. So you have your stage 1, your stage 2, some people have a stage 3, and then you have your FBO, is what they call full bolt-on. And your stage 1 is basically, most people consider that Accessport intake at a tune, an OTS tune. And then when you get to your stage 2, that's usually the intake, a downpipe, removed boost control pill, and the stage 2 OTS map from Cobb as well. And then there's full bolt-on, which usually can vary. That can mean the car either has every bolt-on you can possibly buy for the car, or some people just call full bolt-on, you know, intercooler, exhaust, intake, you know, bypass valve, intercooler piping, that sort of thing. But it could also mean the car's got an aftermarket turbo, forged internals, all kinds of stuff. So when you hear FBO, just know that the car is above the Cobb stages, but it can vary pretty significantly depending on the build. Okay, so my first piece of advice, obviously when you get the car, enjoy it, take care of it, but you want to get a Cobb Accessport. Everybody's gonna tell you that, and if you're looking for more power, that is the gateway. That is what you need. Now, here's what you don't wanna do. When you buy a Cobb Accessport, you do not want to go out buying any old intake, exhaust, slap them on the car, put a Cobb tune on it. What will happen is the Cobb tune, the Cobb OTS map. When you buy your Accessport, there's OTS maps. And I get this question a lot, which is why I wanted to go over this. When you have a Cobb Accessport, you have OTS, you have stage 1, you have stage 1 plus, stage 0, stage 2, stage 2 plus. And what that usually means, their stage 0 is the car's stock. There's nothing done to it. You just want to get rid of the rev hang and give a more linear power curve to your boost. Stage 1 is usually going to add a little bit of power, but it's assuming that you have no mods. It's just stage 1, it's going to give you a little bit more power than the stage 0. Then you go to your stage 1 plus. And this is where the plus means that you have the Cobb SF intake. This is where people start messing up. There are intakes out there that do not require a tune. Mishimoto used to be one of them. I think now they do recommend a tune with their intake, but it all has to do with the pipe diameter, the MAF location, all kinds of factors that will throw off your air-fuel ratios and that sort of thing. So when you get the Cobb stage 1 plus, you have to have the Cobb SF intake. If you don't, it's going to throw off your air-fuel ratios. Your car's not going to run right. You're going to get knocked. You're going to get dam drops. And a lot of people will argue that it's not going to do that, or that their car's running fine. It might be running fine, as in it didn't blow up, but it definitely is not running optimally, and it could long-term damage your engine, and you don't want that. Also, stage 2. Now, Cobb, I believe, even says that when you run stage 2, as long as you have their intake, you can run any downpipe. Any Catted Downpipe, I believe. I don't know if they recommend catless or not. You could look into that, though, on Cobb's website. But when you get, the exhaust doesn't matter as much because everything is already registered. As long as the O2 sensor's in there, you're fine. You're good to go. But the problem with the intake, as I said, is that your MAF location and that sort of thing is at a different spot. So, let's say you buy a ETS intake, and then you have a Cobb stage 1 map. The stage 1 plus map is calculated to run with the Cobb intake. When you get the ETS intake, it is designed completely different. You're going to have different MAF extension cables, and the MAF might be at a different place. You know, the air filter, everything is different. So running that tune with a different intake could damage the vehicle. If you have an intake that doesn't require a tune, you know, from a manufacturer that says that the intake is safe without a tune, that just means that if you put that intake on a stock car, you don't need to tune it for the intake. That doesn't mean that you can run the stage 1 Cobb map with that intake, because if you do that, you're risking damaging the motor. Getting away from Cobb stuff, let's talk about making power. So making power on these cars is pretty simple. It's very simple. It does take a little bit of money, but I'm going to tell you the simplest and the cheapest way to do this. So a lot of people don't know this, but intakes are just noisemakers. If you're making under 400 horsepower, it's pretty much just a noisemaker. Same with bypass valves. Your stock bypass valve with the stock turbo setup is fine. That bypass valve isn't really going to leak. Now, I know Boomba and a couple other companies claim that the stock bypass valve leaks. Maybe when the car's got 100,000 miles on it and that bypass valve has seen a lot of life, it might start leaking a little bit. But from factory, that bypass valve can handle that turbo just fine, and you don't need to upgrade now. However, they do sound good, and it is nice to hear the induction noise from the intake and the bypass valve. I do have the Boomba bypass valve on this car, and it sounds great. I also have an intake on this car, sounds great. While we're on the topic of intakes, also, I recommend not using an intake that comes with a MAF extension cable. If you get an intake that comes with a MAF extension cable, sometimes they can corrode, they can cause issues, which is going to throw off your MAF reading, and in turn throw off your air-fuel ratio, your timing, and all that stuff. So just be careful with that. If you do have an intake that runs a MAF extension, make sure to check it. Also, if you are pro-tuned and you get tuned with an aftermarket intake, this sounds ridiculous, but if you change your filter or you clean your filter, before you take that filter off, mark on your intake where that filter was with a Sharpie, a paint pen, something that you can clearly see where the filter was. When you take that filter off, you want to put it back on in the exact same spot. If you don't, it can throw off your MAF readings, throw off your air fuel, etc., etc. So just make sure you do that as well. I did that for the sound. I knew it wasn't really going to do much for me. Your bolt-ons, like your downpipe and that sort of thing, those all matter nowhere near as much as your fuel. So your best friend in this car is going to be flex fuel. And when I say that, I mean stock, modded, whatever. Flex fuel is your best friend. You can take a stock car and put E30 in it, 30% ethanol. You don't need a fuel pump. You don't need a flex fuel kit. If you have an Accessport and access to ethanol, you can put in a 30% blend. You'll have to measure it out to make sure you get the blend right. With a 30% blend, you can see up to 300 wheel horsepower on a completely stock car. If you take that ethanol and you bump it up to 60%, you can also do that without a flex fuel kit. But you're going to need a fuel pump, and you're going to have to be really, really good at measuring the ethanol content in your gas. If you don't want to do that, the secure thing to do would be to buy a flex fuel kit. I would only recommend Cobb's, as others have had a lot of issues. There's a Penguin Racing flex fuel kit, which you can get it if you want. It is cheaper, but you get what you pay for. But anyways, if you get an E60 blend on a completely stock car, you could make up to 350 wheel horsepower. That's 100 horsepower over factory, more than 100 horsepower at the wheels over factory. These cars tend to make between 220, 240 wheel horsepower from the factory. So you are essentially adding 100 wheel horsepower with fuel change. So you got your $600 Accessport, you got your $600 flex fuel kit, you got your $5,000 to $1,000 Protune, depending where you go. You're in about $2,000, and you just added 100 wheel horsepower. Pretty good for the price, right? After the ethanol, every part matters less. So with a stock car with an E60 blend, you're going to be making close to 350 wheel horsepower, if not that. And when I say the mods matter a little bit less after ethanol, here's what I mean. My car is making 372 wheel horsepower. So a stock car on ethanol making 350. This makes 372. Okay, 22 extra horsepower. Fine, that's good. But I have an intercooler, I have a downpipe, I have an intake, I have TGV deletes, I have EGR deletes, I have a fuel pump. Well, you're going to need a fuel pump, but you get what I'm saying. All that stuff matters a lot less when you have ethanol. Ethanol is the power maker. I would also recommend, if you are going to get pro-tuned for ethanol or pro-tuned in general, first things first, TGV delete, EGR delete. If you don't have the money for them, or you're trying to pinch pennies, you can unplug your EGR and TGV, and you can do that as well. But I would recommend getting Deletes. They're a cleaner look, and it's just how it is. It's just simpler to just remove them and be done with it. Also, if you live in a place where you can only get 91, or you can get 93, but you're seeing a lot of knock and you're seeing a lot of dam dropping and stuff like that, you can go to an ethanol pump if it's available to you. You can add 2 to 3 gallons of ethanol to your tank of 93, and that will work as an octane booster and essentially help with knock, help reduce all that stuff so that your car doesn't pull timing and that sort of thing, and it will definitely help. So now let's talk about oil. Keep up with your oil. Check the oil level. Make sure you're doing changes. With these cars, with full synthetic oil, you can probably go about 6,000 miles on a change. If you want to do it before then, you can. But there's always this underlying myth that 3,000 miles is when you should change your oil. All these newer cars with synthetic oil, you can go 6,000 to 8,000 miles in between changes. Personally, I do mine every 5. And I top it off sometimes in between if it gets low. But here's the thing with oil. You want to be using a high zinc oil. And what I mean is, like a lot of oils, I use Rotella T6. So here's Rotella T6, and if you didn't know, this is a diesel oil, which is strange, but it's high in zinc. It also is a 5W40, and a lot of people run 530 or 1030. 5W40 is a good oil weight, and you definitely want something high in zinc. It doesn't have to be the Shell Rotella, but this is a great oil. A lot of Subaru people run it. A lot of tuners will recommend this oil, and that's just how it is. So with modern cars and all the emissions and everything, you're gonna get oil burning in your car. And basically what happens is sometimes your piston seals don't seal up perfectly, and it lets pressure down into your crankcase. That oil or that pressure then needs somewhere to go. So they have to have a vent on the block. And a lot of newer cars have a PCV valve, and the crankcase pressure goes through and it gets sucked in by your intake. So it's usually routed into your intake tract, and it gets sucked in by your intake, and then there you burn it. It gets on your valves, it gets on your cylinder heads, it gets everywhere, and it's not good for the car. The EGR valve does something similar, but with unburnt fuel. And so you end up with a mess. You end up with more issues with the car. It gets dirtier, and it doesn't run as efficient. So what you want to get is either catch cans or an AOS system. That all depends on your budget, what you want for a setup, if you're okay with maintenance or not. Certain AOS systems, which is an air oil separator, which is basically going to take that air in with the crankcase pressure coming in. It's going to basically separate the oil from the air oil separator, and it's going to go back into your intake tract or dump into the atmosphere, depending what you have. Now, some IAG air oil separators drain back into the crankcase. That can be a good thing or a bad thing, but there's no maintenance with those, and you never really have to worry about it. You can pull it apart and clean it every now and then, but you don't have to drain it. Then there's the IAG AOS. It's the race system, and that's going to require a tune. And the reason it's going to require a tune is because there is a drain valve that basically lets the oil vapor go directly into the atmosphere. You also might smell a little oil burning smell with that. That's just going to happen with that. But I recommend catch cans. I actually just ordered a set of Radium catch cans for my car, and they should be here soon. I'll be doing a full install video on that. But I think they're more effective, and they're a little bit more maintenance, but they're a lot less worry. Also, with some of the AOS systems, upgrading the turbo and stuff, you can have the valves in the AOS system fail and ultimately blow up the car. The AOS race model is going to be okay with an aftermarket turbo. So if you do end up going aftermarket turbo, you want the race system or catch cans. The street system is probably not going to do it. I would just avoid all of that and go with catch cans. You can do what you want. IAG makes great products, and I do think that the AOS system is great. Just depending on your application, it can change. So I know I might be all over the place here, but I'm just trying to think of everything and not leave anything unturned. Another issue is catless downpipes. A lot of people get the car and they want a really loud exhaust, and they go catless. What that entails is there's no cat in the exhaust, so the exhaust just comes straight through the turbo and out the exhaust. And the stock exhaust downpipe has a catalytic converter and a resonator in it, if you have the WRX. And what happens is you remove that and you have no catalytic converter and you have literally no back pressure whatsoever. And what that often does is create an overboosting issue. So what will happen is you'll be flooring it and your boost target is set somewhere and it's going to increase and go over your boost target, and it can cause serious damage to your motor, and it's really not good. What happens is the car runs out of fuel. So when you overboost, basically the wastegate isn't opening when it's supposed to and letting the boost escape. It's just going to keep climbing. The car's going to run out of fuel, and ultimately one bad pull could lead to an explosion of your freaking motor. So one thing to keep in mind, there's two ways to get rid of that, basically, and there is three ways. There is to get a catted downpipe, which is going to be slightly quiet, slightly more quiet than the catless one. But in my opinion, it sounds better anyway. It's not as raspy. You can also get external wastegate headers. You can get like Killer B external wastegate headers, where you're going to have two external wastegates on the headers that are going to relieve that turbo pressure, and you won't have to worry about overboosting. So if you get the catless system, the way to get around that is to get the external wastegate headers, or adding more fuel. And the way to do that would be port injection or meth injection. Port injection is a lot more expensive. You're looking between $13,000 to $15,000 to get port injection with a Motec system, or you can go about $2,000 route by getting a tune and getting the water meth injection. So the water meth injection is going to give you that extra fuel, so if you do overboost, it's not going to explode anything. With all that said, guys, I might be forgetting some stuff, but I tried to cover as much as I can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to link in the description my tuner's website, Phatbotti Tuning. He has everything laid out there for you. He has part recommendations, power estimates on your parts, fueling situations, exhaust situations, everything you could think that you could run into, he has covered. And he does a great job tuning cars. There's also a lot of great tuners out there. There's Mikey Tune, Ambot Tune, that sort of thing. But definitely I recommend Ron from Phatbotti. This is my second car now that he's tuned, and he's actually done 3 separate tunes for me, and all of them have been great. He tuned my buddy's car, did a great job. So depending where you live, if you want a Pro Tune or an E-Tune, definitely check him out, and he's very knowledgeable about this platform, and I highly recommend him. Anyways, guys, that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions I didn't answer in this video, go ahead and leave a comment. I'll try and answer as many as I can. But anyways, I appreciate you watching, and thanks for the feedback, and I'll see you next time.